Welcome to the Sensible Socialist Podcast, a podcast for the rational left.
We need to unite and work together if we're all going to get through this. Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero. I'm
How
not
heroic he
fucking
comes from.
idiot. If Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez.
Oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Gustafson, and today we're talking with Eva Putzova. I said that right? Putzova?
Yes, Eva.
Putzova. All right. Right, Eva. I suppose we say Eva, but Eva is the appropriate pronunciation. Eva Putzova from ROC United about the Restaurant Worker Bill of Rights. So, as we all know, COVID policies, market reactions have exacerbated the structural issues that restaurant workers have been facing for, forever. Wage theft, sexual harassment, inconsistent scheduling, unsafe work conditions, low minimum wages, long hours, short staffs. You hear these crazy stories about closing the restaurant at night and then having to open it the next day and only having 3 hours to sleep or something. It's really crazy for particularly restaurant workers. And as the American economy shifted from its kind of industrial base to a service-based economy, the so-called unskilled cohort of the working class went from working in docks to working in kitchens, from factory floors to waiting tables. And when COVID hit, these workers lost their jobs, their livelihoods, any security they had. And during that period, at the same time, we were shown how necessary they are and how these restaurant workers and other essential workers are a permanent and important part of the working class of the United States. So this, I think, lit a fire under ROC United, the country's oldest and largest restaurant workers-led organization, that's been working for better wages and working conditions for restaurant workers for a long time, to create and to work for the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, which is a comprehensive policy framework that they are wanting to champion at local, state, and national levels. So to talk to me about this, I've got Eva Putzova. Eva is got a master's degree in economics in Bratislava, Slovakia. Eva moved to the U.S., where she completed programs at Harvard and Cornell in leadership. In 2014, she was elected to the Flagstaff, that's in Arizona, City Council for a 4-year term. And then in 2020, she ran in the Democratic Party primary, which I'm sure was a fun ordeal, for the House of Representatives, and got over 40% of the primary vote. While a city councilor, Eva was instrumental in raising the minimum wage and the tipped minimum wage to $15.50 an hour. And as a result of her work, she's the recipient of the Arizona Women Vision Award from the Arizona Women's Conference and the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for demonstrating democratic values in her service to the community. Eva joined ROC United in 2018 as the Communications and Technology Director and now works in the National Political Director role. So Eva, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I want to start off, I do this sort of with everybody that comes on, is just to get a little bit more background than in some ways my little potted bio. Okay, you've got a degree in economics. You came here from Slovakia. You got elected to city council. There's an interesting story there, but I want to kind of round it out and have you just give a bit of a background on how you I think got interested in this particular line of work, what made you interested in economics to study it to begin with, what brought you to the States, why'd you decide to run for city council, all those kind of questions. Feel free to give us whatever bio you think is necessary and useful.
So I ended up going to the University of Economics because at the time, back in 1995, it was a university that was very difficult to get to in Slovakia. Only 1 in 10 people who applied actually got admitted. And it ended up being an easy school. I do think that business schools and generally schools that kind of prepare people to work in marketing and in various management positions are not necessarily the most difficult schools, or the disciplines are not taught in a way that makes it difficult. So it was difficult to get in, easy to finish. And then, as so many immigrants, I ended up in the United States because I fell in love. And my partner had a student loan to pay, and I didn't, because education is tuition free in Slovakia. And so,
What a radical idea that is.
lucky me, and Slovak taxpayers, my parents, everybody else paid for the next generation. I grew up in a very politically active environment in Slovakia and was greatly influenced by the events of the Velvet Revolution in 1989. I was 12. In fact, exactly today, is the 33rd anniversary of the fall of the Iron Curtain. At least that's when we celebrated in Czechia and in Slovakia. My father, after the 1989, was a county chair of the Democratic Party. And so it was just a matter of time when I became politically active in Arizona. First, I was interested in environmental justice issues, but that very quickly expanded into the area of social and economic justice. When I ran for city council, I ran on one big agenda item, and it was to raise the minimum wage, because Flagstaff, which is this very beautiful mountain town in northern Arizona, is known as the poverty with the view. So it's very expensive. A lot of people from Phoenix own second homes here. It's just housing is expensive. Healthcare is way more expensive than in metropolitan areas. And so I got elected, but I didn't have the necessary votes to pass the minimum wage ordinance legislatively with the city council. And so I led a local citizen initiative through which we raised the minimum wage. In fact, this coming January, the minimum wage will be $16.80, because we built in the cost of living adjustment. And through this work, I got educated about the issues that restaurant workers face, and how we have in many states this two-wage system, regular minimum wage and wage for tipped workers. And that's how I got connected to ROC United. And eventually, I ended up joining them professionally. I used to have a whole career in academia, working at the university on kind of administration side as director of strategic planning and executive director for strategic communications. But I wanted to spend my days working for causes that I really believe in. And so I shifted to essentially labor movement. And then I ran for Congress, and that was very interesting. As you said, I learned a lot. It was a fascinating experience, and we did fantastically. We were among the top 3 campaigns nationally that managed to get that many votes against a blue dog Democrat that was supported by the establishment. And now I'm back with the ROC United and in this role of national political director.
Awesome. I am slightly curious about, in some ways, the primary. So it is Flagstaff. Does the city council stuff, are they like technically nonpartisan elections, but then the parties get involved?
Yes, so the city of Flagstaff is, that those races are non-partisan. The parties usually support those candidates that have declared affiliation. So it's not like the parties are not involved in the process, but when you get your ballot, you don't know unless you research whether a candidate is Democrat, Republican, or Independent. I mean, it's you can assume and you can definitely tell based on how they campaign, who they campaign with, who supports them, and what kind of issues they focus on. You can definitely tell where their values are.
So, I mean, you did the primary in 2020, right? Which is obviously
that was within the Democratic Party primary.
and that's quite a time to be in, like, the presidential elections coming up, all that kind of stuff. And so what I'm curious about is really just the maybe the perspective that you have, like maybe what changed in your perspective kind of coming into that experience, going through it, and then sort of at the end of it, regarding maybe the primary process as it stands, the Democratic Party and its sort of role, whether that's sort of understandable, nefarious, negligent, what, like, how you feel.
So what the greatest lesson that I learned, and I really didn't know just how, a lot of nonprofits and their C4 arms are intertwined with the party, and how they really help the established candidate or the established elected incumbents to stay in power, even if they they're oppose major policy issues that the organization claims to support. And Sierra Club was, to me, one of those organizations where I was shocked, that there was a local support to endorse my candidacy against the against the incumbent, because I supported the Green New Deal and the incumbent didn't. But when that decision ultimately was made, the state, I guess, and our national organization didn't go with the local recommendations, and they stick with the Blue Dog Democrat, even though he did not support the Green New Deal and was far on so many issues that the organization claims to support. So it was like a little bit of a disappointment, because I guess maybe I naively thought that, the issue-based organizations, they think long-term, and they really are a little more strategic about this. But I guess it's, the power of establishment is not to be underestimated, and we need to figure out, how to get better representatives who are not corrupted by corporate money to represent us.
Well, yeah, that's I can imagine, what a frustrating experience to be the one that represents the actual interests of the people and the groups, and then to not get the support of the party. It makes you wonder if the party is in support of the positions or the groups. But also, obviously, you being a supporter of the Green New Deal and things like that were likely, I think, to some in the Democratic Party, probably harder to control than potentially the incumbent. And so, well, who do we want? Do we want somebody who, yes, supports good policies, but isn't going to just vote with us all the time? Or do we want someone who thinks for themselves? Oh, can't have someone who thinks for themselves. But I'm pretty cynical when it comes to the Democratic Party. But we're here to talk about the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights. But I do want to introduce ROC United, and kind of, can you tell us, a bit about ROC United and how they, the organization, how long they've been doing the work, and some of the other things that they do?
Yeah, so ROC United as an organization started 20 years ago, and it's the oldest and the largest restaurant workers-led organization in the country. We work to improve restaurant workers' lives by building worker power, and our programs focus on 3 areas. The number one is research and advocacy across many policy issues, including housing, childcare, paid leave, healthcare, immigration, wages, scheduling, safety, you name it. And then the second pillar of our work is we are active in workplace justice campaigns that essentially respond to the violation of restaurant workers' existing rights in an environment that often lacks strategic enforcement of wage and labor standards. And that can be at the local, state, and federal levels. And then finally, we are involved in education and training, and that helps restaurant workers pursue upward economic mobility while they learn about their rights and about policy reforms that can improve their standing if enacted.
Awesome. How big is ROC United? I mean, is it a large organization?
So yes, we are large. We are a large organization. We mobilize and activate thousands and thousands of workers every year on different issues. We have 10 different chapters around the country, a couple in California, Minnesota, Chicago, DC, Pennsylvania, New Orleans, Mississippi. I'm hoping I'm not forgetting anyone. But we work with restaurant workers who come to us for help. We run Know Your Rights educational kind of campaigns, and then we try to affect policy to the degree we can. As a nonprofit organization, we do have a 501c4 arm, ROC Action. So we are large in numbers, but I think we are even larger in impact. For example, last year we have recovered $2 million in stolen wages. And the wage theft is a big issue in the restaurant industry. And the listeners may know that actually wage theft in the United States amounts to more money than all other theft combined.
Yep, and that's always anyone out there who's got parents or friends or something who like to complain about the um, abuse, fraud, and misspending of something like welfare funding can just look at the amount that is taken by employers from employees, and it will dwarf the amount that is taken by poor people, maybe who don't technically qualify but who are still in poverty. So yeah, that's does now you were saying much of the work of ROC United particularly is policy oriented, hence the sort of Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights. Does ROC generally work with a particular labor union or different labor unions to do that kind of organizing aspect of the work? Because I mean, organizing workers does have kind of 2 or 3 different aspects, right? You have the particular particular kind of labor organizing around the specific issues at that particular workplace. Then you've got the sort of larger, I dare I say, class-based organizing to unite and identify common struggles among, in different areas. And then you have the kind of political orientation or advocacy that takes all of that pressure and translates it into legislative or executive sort of actions and activities. So if I understand it, ROC is really focused on that political aspect and the sort of organization to recognize the commonalities, but isn't necessarily, it's not a traditional labor union. So do you work with labor unions, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we are not a labor union, but worker organizing is foundational to all our programs. So and the way, because we recognize that, it's not about just passing or, improving a particular policy, but we have to balance the power. And we can do that when we have workers engaged in their own workplaces, engaged and understand their own rights. We educate them about, if they want to form a union, here are the ways, these are your rights as they exist. And so we are not union, we're not organizing in that traditional, that we would negotiate and with the employer contract, but we help restaurant workers understand what their rights are if they want to organize a union. So and we definitely are, talking to unions and other worker centers because we definitely understand the power that there is in solidarity with the workers. But I just want to emphasize that we are not a policy organization. We really are a worker-based organization. We do, the policy is one of the pillars, but we get to the policy with our members and based on what they say they want to pursue. That's why we're not just focusing, let's say, on increasing the minimum wage or raising the tipped wage. We recognize that workers need more help in other areas as well, including like scheduling, safety, and health. Childcare has very unique, I guess, characteristics when it comes to restaurant workers, because we don't have people that are working, 9 to 5. So that the organizing is foundational, important, and kind of the core of what we do. It's through education, restaurant workers get interested in policy, right? And then they can be effective spokespeople for their own rights. And so we work with them and for them.
Yeah, and this is, I think, very much a different model than your kind of what I would call the stereotypical or standard sort of nonprofit industrial complex organizations that are advocacy or policy or think tank oriented or something, because these are usually professional, managerial, privileged people who have good perspectives, who have a desire to do good things most of the time. I'm not sure that the American Enterprise Institute does all that, or maybe the Chamber of Commerce does all the time, but many of them are, good organizations, but they are not of and by and for the groups of people for whom they advocate on behalf of. They are definitely advocating on behalf of. Whereas I think ROC is one of those very great organizations which is not placing themselves at the head of the restaurant workers. They are a representation of restaurant workers, which is a very different dynamic than your traditional Washington D.C. think tank or something.
Restaurant workers definitely drive our policy agenda. They decide what campaigns they want to get involved in, and it may vary in DC. Those may be different campaigns than in Minnesota or in California. And so we definitely work on the ground with the restaurant workers. And then, the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights really came out of work of restaurant workers. They actually wrote this message bill or this list of demands. And it's very comprehensive because the issues that restaurant workers face and the discriminations and injustices, they are also very complex, and they touch on every aspect of their lives.
The draft legislation does a good job. So I'm hoping that before we get into like the sort of 5 major aspects of it, just the sort of background question as to the first thing is kind of like you see a restaurant worker bill of rights, and you look through the bill of the sort of rights that we're talking about. And for those who know about the Franklin Roosevelt's proposal for the second Bill of Rights, which would be economic, social, cultural rights, or the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, or the existence of these more social, cultural, and economic rights in other constitutions and in other jurisdictions in terms of Europe and other. I mean, South Africa's got a lot. There's India has a lot of these kind of normal. These are normal in most social democratic. I mean, obviously Slovakia. I'm sure many of these are sort of part of the political and economic structure of life in Slovakia or Czechia or something. But they're not in the United States. These are not part of our 10 Bill of Rights or any of the other amendments. And so one, I guess, just to one, for those of us who are generally interested in workers' rights across the board, might kind of say, well, why restaurant workers? Why not, just a workers' Bill of Rights that would include these? And then I think what was really helpful for me was reading the legislation and having the sort of beginning, a lot of the whereas let's show how bad, just how unique the situation is of restaurant workers in terms of the difficulties. And so I'm hoping, can elucidate on that a little bit and kind of let us and those listening know just kind of what the situation is for restaurant workers in particular.
Yeah, so obviously we are an organization that we're fighting for a better lives for restaurant workers. So our bill kind of grew very grassrootsy. But it's so interesting that you're saying what you're saying or suggesting that why not for all workers, right? And we have multiple partners, and we were chatting with the National Black Workers Center, and they came up with their Black Workers Bill of Rights. And when we compare the notes, it's almost identical in its scope. So what I think is happening is that you have these different groups working with their constituencies, putting together a list of demands, and we see a huge overlap. And what I suspect is going to happen in the future, that this effort, our individual efforts, will eventually be combined. And I think this is a good way, the way we are building this solidarity and movement, because it is organic, it is based on what the members of our organizations want and need, but we see also how they overlap and how there's so much commonality. And I can see in the future and all workers' Bill of Rights, where all of our worker centered organizations band and push for something that is for all of us. So, and restaurant workers have some specific challenges as other workers in other sectors have. One that we already kind of touched on is that we still have this two-wage system, and we have, I think, 17 states where you still have tipped wage at $2.13, which is the federal tip wage. Other states, they have a little bit higher, but still two-wage system, and we only have 7 states in which we have a single minimum wage for all workers, regardless whether they work in tipped occupations or not. And then Flagstaff, Arizona, when fully implemented by 2026, will be the one jurisdiction outside of the 7 states that will also have single wage rate for all workers. But then there's issues with, for example, with healthcare. So only 23.5% of restaurant workers they lived without healthcare coverage, and this is data from 2017, so a little bit dated, but we don't have newer data. And this is the triple the national rate. So, and we kind of know it, right, intuitively, that people who work in the restaurant industry and service industry, they don't have access to the kind of benefits that the professional managerial class enjoys, because businesses are providing these benefits voluntarily, right? And we don't have any standards at the federal level to guarantee universal health care that's decoupled from employment. There is no guarantee for health care in the United States. And so that's kind of a big issue. 70% of women in the restaurant industry experience some form of sexual harassment. And again, because they are dependent on tips, they are forced to put up with all kinds of behavior from customers, but also from co-workers. Tipped workers, servers depend on their co-workers, on people in the kitchen, people around the managers, right? And so they must, if they want to take care of their families, they must tolerate this. It's another reason why we need to get rid of the sub-minimum tipped wage. And in fact, at ROC United, we don't just argue that we need to get rid of this two-wage system. We are saying that we need thriving wages. We cannot just tolerate higher minimum wage or a wage that would just bring you out of poverty. We deserve, as people who work, a real thriving wage that includes everything. It includes access to healthcare, that includes universal childcare, that includes time off and a fair scheduling. So this is what the kind of big idea behind the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights is, that we need to deliver the kind of environment where restaurant workers, and I guess all workers, can live thriving lives.
I want to talk about the 5 rights that are included in the Bill of Rights, and you started off already sort of talking about the right to a thriving wage, which I do really enjoy the framing, because right, we have moved from something like a fair wage, which I'm not really sure what that means, to something like a living wage, which again is very dependent on where you live and all those kinds of things, and so it's not kind of equal or anything around the country. And then you've got this framing that you all use, which I really like, the thriving wage, which, as you mentioned, doesn't stop, I guess, in some ways, merely at the amount of money that you're getting in your paycheck, but that you see a more expansive view of what it is to kind of work and to be remunerated for that work. And so that goes beyond a check with some amount of money in it. It's the guarantees of sustainable and high quality housing, of free at the point of service, childcare, and healthcare, and even, I mean, I imagine you could throw a lot of, I think, other things. It's school, access to school, as part of what we might re-understand as our kind of our social wage that is linked to the job that we have, but is actually encompassed other things. So I don't know yet, like you did mention or something, but like, how do you see this advocation for the thriving wage? What is the thriving wage?
So I think the idea really comes out of this understanding that as a society, we are a very wealthy society, and we need to approach our demands from the perspective of abundance that exists in our economy, and that every single person that works, and even people who for many reasons cannot work, deserve to live their lives with dignity. And the thriving wage kind of includes all these access to all these other, and I don't want to even call them benefits. I mean, we refer to them as benefits, but to me, these are human rights, right? To have a roof over your head and food on your table, and ability to have kids go to good schools. We also need security in retirement. I think one area of policies that we don't talk enough in this country is just how dire the situation is going to be as our population ages, and in a context of the kind of jobs that most people these days have, and they're juggling multiple jobs without having any benefits that would secure their retirement. So that's the I guess underpinning philosophical for the idea of thriving wage and thriving life, that includes all these areas that, in my opinion and opinions of many workers, fall under kind of the big umbrella of rights.
So the second right, the right to healing and rest. Now, when I did go through these, it did feel like a very common thread is the focus on kind of healthcare and the things that orbit around that, in the sense, like, to me, healthcare and housing are not super able to be disentangled. You know, if you don't have very good housing, even your access to like high quality healthcare is not going to help you with your underlying problem, which is that you live somewhere that is subpar. But I'm wondering to kind of what is specifically meant by the right to healing and rest.
Right. So one big thing that emerged from our recent research is that the grueling hours one has to work in the restaurant industry to make ends meet put a lot of stress on people's relationships and their overall well-being. And I have here one quote that I think it's just heartbreaking. In our survey, as we were putting together this Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, one worker shared with us, and they said, being worked to death with very little money to show means I'm not contributing by being away from home. I'm too tired to cook, clean, and keep up with the house. If I were to get sick for more than 2-3 days, we could end up homeless. This is the situation that so many restaurant workers, and of course also people in other essential workers are experiencing. And so we must advocate for meaningful paid, not only paid parental leave and sufficient paid sick leave, but also for generous paid vacation time, because the time people take to recharge from work is necessary for them to be well and to be contributing members of society and to be actually able to work. We essentially, as I mentioned, we have 2 sets of jobs in this country, dividing working folks into 2 different classes. And there's no inherent reason why a server or a cook in a restaurant couldn't enjoy the same paid vacation time off as, let's say, a business analyst working in a private sector or a governmental agency. And because the industry is not stepping up voluntarily, we need to demand these paid time off benefits to be legislated.
I think that is perfect, and I think it is one thing that is often maybe misunderstood or not, focused on enough, is that you've got now, we've heard the phenomenon of quiet quitting and the sort of decrease in productivity from working from home and stuff like that, which is really just people taking their time back in some sense. But for all of the essential workers and restaurant workers and those who don't have the luxury of being able to sit in front of their computer at home and do or don't do work, this becomes even much more of a kind of 2-class divide within the working class of those who can that have that kind of luxury and those that don't, and so and very easy to have all of those who don't kind of fall into this silent bin, because the ones who are at their computers can stay on Twitter all day, whereas somebody who's serving food can't.
We need more solidarity. I really do believe that we need more solidarity within the working class people, especially those that enjoy some of these benefits that businesses are not required to provide, but businesses are providing because they know they would have no workers then. And so I do think that that is necessary to lift the people from the bottom. And frankly, the best way is to advocate for policies for guaranteed paid leave, something that employer, is not just like voluntarily contributing to an employee, but something that they're required to, at least minimal standards that are generous. So we're not talking here just about 2-3 days of sick time or 5 days of vacation. That's nonsense. Nobody can really recharge and heal with that kind of sick leave or vacation time in a year.
It's always been ironic to me that those who do the least amount of actual physical labor tend to be the ones who have the most vacation time. It's like you don't need to recover. You're not doing the kind of real, like, honest to God physical labor that you find at restaurants. My God, which I think leads to the next one, which I think specifically for restaurant workers, I can totally understand why this is important, because the right to a safe and dignified work environment. Now, this is universal, I think, in the working class. Very few workers work in a place in which they feel genuinely respected and like they're not, immediately replaceable, and all these kind of, that they have dignity at the workplace. I don't think a lot of people feel that way, but man, do restaurant workers not. You can't go to a restaurant on your own to eat some food or to meet friends and not in some ways witness the kind of hyper exploitation by the customer that happens in the in the restaurant industry, not to mention the kind of a crazy oppressive situations that they have from managers, from owners, and from just the nature of the work itself. And so to me, this one was like very straightforward and understandable, and among the most necessary, because restaurants are dangerous. They are filled with harassment, and I think it's like it was Anthony Bourdain was the one that kind of really talked about how crazy working in a kitchen at a restaurant really is. And then when you have that experience of actually doing so, sometimes it even boggles the mind, because people do not know what's happening behind the doors of the restaurants. And if they did, this would be a no-brainer.
Well, interestingly, people maybe don't, but maybe if they reach to their memory, they would recall these instances, because 1 in 2 Americans at some point in their lives work in the restaurant industry. So we actually have a whole industry where, for some people, this is their very first job, and this industry sets standards for what people expect in their subsequent employment. And you often can hear it's like, well, but it's never, if people experience harassment of some sort, and they can say, well, but it's never as bad as it was in the restaurant industry, right? So like it colors the bar is so low by the standards in the industry overall. And I'm not saying that in any specific business, because there are definitely great employers among restaurant owners, and they're great businesses that people actually like to work with. But there are also so many, because we do not have those standards guaranteed by federal policy or local and state. And then even if we have those standards guaranteed, we don't put enough money to enforce the standards and enforce them strategically. The other part, when you talk about safe and dignified work environment, we cannot not mention immigration. 10% of restaurant workers are immigrants, and we are also demanding that Congress enact federal policies to ensure all immigrant workers and their families currently in the United States have the opportunity to normalize their immigration status, be it temporary authorization, lawful permanent status, or full citizenship, including immediate eligibility to work and access healthcare and other government programs and support, because that's important for people's safety and dignity. And people are working. Immigrants, even those without documentation, are working. That means they deserve the kind of protections, and they deserve to be part of the society.
Yeah, I think I just like want to put a fine point on that. Like it's particularly in the restaurant industry, I think that is an acute need. But it is, again, what you were kind of saying, that this likely reverberates out into the larger working class, because like you're saying too, the setting of standards that happens in this industry really does. It's like, if you just make it really terrible when people start working, even if their job is just a little less terrible, they're like, oh, I'm so happy to be here, compared to like going back to the restaurant or whatever. That I was just having a conversation about millennials' perspective on even the notion of just work, and whether or not they have any kind of expectation that their job is going to provide them any kind of dignity or self-worth in itself, rather than just via the paycheck. And I'm putting on my very much cynical hat, I highly doubt it. I think that many millennials, having gone through recessions and the kind of things that we've gone through in our sort of time, cynicism and in some ways even despair are somewhat high, and the expectations are very low. And so if you do, and that's partly because I think many and most of us have gone through the crucible of the low wage, unsafe, harassment filled, long hours, significant hard work that happens at restaurants. And so to totally reorient that dynamic, and to make that first entrant one in which you have these expectations and these protections, wildly reorients everyone's perspective when it comes to what it is to work in a just environment. And I think that that's it's incredibly important, and it leads again to the next right. This one too. It again, it's healthcare based, a right to healthcare and bodily autonomy. I think that that's the bodily autonomy to me is a signal, and I know it's in the details of the like sort of the actual model proposal of something obviously that people are interested in now, specifically because of the Dobbs decision about reproductive health, right? So it's big picture in terms of access to healthcare. And the point one that you love, which I think is something that again is universal but particular to restaurant workers, is decoupling healthcare from employment.
Mm-hmm.
Why this was done in the first place, I don't understand. But regardless of its historical necessity or utility or whatever, it is obviously a system that does not work very well. I wonder what you would say to the person who says this seems outside of a kind of workplace demand. So how do you connect this to, workers' rights? How is this a workers' right rather than just a kind of social democratic standard right of any person?
Well, right now it's very much connected to employment, because the only way you can get healthcare is through employment. Yes, you can go on exchanges and buy healthcare from very few options, and it's not comprehensive and it's expensive. So to not provide healthcare, this is kind of, we're getting to this whole idea is of rights, right? In this country, we do not recognize healthcare as a right. We as an organization and our members demand that healthcare is recognized as a right, because it is and it's not just good for workers, that they have healthcare that's comprehensive and covers everything from abortion care to gender affirming healthcare, vision, dental, everything, right? It's not only good for the individual, it's good for business. Like, why would businesses argue that, yeah, they insist on having this burden to figure out and provide healthcare plans, right? Or we're just cannot even, we cannot provide, so we're not going to. And that's going to limit what kind of, who can apply for your open positions. So in our perspective, it's in both the industry interest and it's in the interest of the individual workers that we decouple healthcare from employment. And then also it's just a basic human rights. A person who loses employment for some reason should not be without healthcare, or find a different healthcare that has completely different plans that maybe their current provider is not covered under. So we know that there's so much waste, so much abuse, so much complexity in our healthcare system that we absolutely need to reform it, and we all would be so much better off. Such a big portion of our GDP and growing portion of our GDP goes to healthcare expenses, while the outcomes are worse and worse. So I think that, sometimes it's good to look across, across the borders and see what's out there and what other models, and there are many models that are superior to the exploitative model of healthcare and the profit-driven healthcare we have.
Indeed. So the last right is obviously one that is near and dear to my heart in particular, and I do have, in some ways, one suggestion, I guess, or a question about an addition that may be of interest. But the right is the right to participation in governance, which I think is nicely broad in the sense, because I think it is both governance of our society in terms of genuine access to political participation, and making specific demands on policy changes and legislative changes. But that it does also talk about, the right to unionize and the right to have a say in what goes on in the workplace through the model of, through the, I think, the vehicle, seemingly of labor unions. So, right, it's, I do think it's important. It mentions eliminating the racist exclusions and barriers in the National Labor Relations Act, which I think it's a black mark on the NLRA for sure. Being able to talk openly about unionizing, not having secret ballot elections for unions, but just majority approval, overturning Taft-Hartley, which is, I think, a very important thing and would allow sector-wide unions and a lot of different things that would be extremely beneficial for larger working class organizations, though that's a big ask. Passing the PRO Act, banning state and local right to work laws, establishing penalties when lawyers break the laws to bust unions. These all, for me, again, sound great, right? These are all things that absolutely are necessary to do. The one thing, and then you have a whole thing about making it easier to vote, decreasing the barriers to vote, establishing universal registration, and all of that. Again, more voting is always better. More democracy tends to get better results. The one part of, I guess, I would ask or be curious about is how much of a discussion about something like a right of first refusal for a restaurant that wants to close or sell to allow employees to buy them and turn them into worker cooperatives, or national legislation to make it easier for private businesses to convert to co-ops and get some kind of either tax incentives or loan aids from the small business, like administration or whatever. I don't know how much, again, I totally recognize that you are a worker-led organization, and this may not be on the tip of the tongues of workers day in and day out, but I would be curious if this is something that you have heard, if it may be part of the proposal, because I do think that, again, from like a cooperative focused socialist perspective, that I do want to encourage and having more examples of workers owning and controlling the means of production, even if it's in individual areas. And I think if doing so in a place where many workers see other workers, which is actually not that common, right? Most people are not going into factories where where workers are seeing other workers are in the essential worker areas of, grocery stores and clothing stores and some of those kinds of things. And then in restaurants, if they could have more of an example of cooperative run restaurants, especially if they were formerly sort of traditionally capitalist run, then you now have a wider awareness and awareness raising capability by having restaurant workers, again, lead in this sense and provide a kind of example that may reverberate out into the larger working class. So that's this is a very important aspect of the rights, and I think it's rightly included in these. And you've got really important proposals like decreasing Taft-Hartley. But I'm curious what you think about trying to encourage worker ownership of restaurant worker ownership of restaurants as a part of the larger right to participation in political governance, but also economic governance.
So as I mentioned, this Restaurant Workers' Bill of Rights was written for and with and by restaurant workers. And the way we think of this message bill or kind of manifesto is that this is a living document. And we've already, we hear there's a lot of interest among restaurant workers, and you can kind of almost every career restaurant worker at some point, they want to open their own restaurant, or some kind of food service business, because they love the industry, they love the work, and the idea of kind of self-management through co-ops is definitely something that our worker members talk about, and we could have legislation that makes it easier. Also, I think that as we, different visions for the society are proposed, including like participatory society with its participatory economics, where we recognize that there's different ways to organize both on the demand and supply and our society, that there may be different and more superior forms of organizations that prepare and deliver food than what we have in this, single owner or some kind of investment group owning private businesses, and certainly that's something that we'll be discussing, because we plan to actually revisit the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights annually with restaurant workers, and these ideas will percolate, and maybe in the next iteration we'll see it in the text.
Perfect. Well, I want to be mindful of your time, so I one question left. I'm curious. The proposals that you have, I agree with wholeheartedly, and I think that they would all make for significant, fundamental, and beneficial changes in the United States for restaurant workers in particular, but I think most people generally. That being said, again, putting back my cynical hat, I have significant reservations about the ability for something like this to actually get not only passed, but even proposed in our current federal, at least, not to mention much of the states, the legislatures. And so is there a kind of legislative action plan, or is there a realistic estimation that, like, this is one aspirational, but also, as you talked about, a kind of document to begin discussions in the industry generally, in terms of understanding what it is that we want to advocate for? And then, maybe the second step on that is to recognize that our current political system, in terms of the duopoly of the Republicans and Democrats and the limitations of Republican government generally, will maybe prohibit this. And that may, my vision on that too is that it's very important to focus on these economic demands. If those economic demands don't tend to find realization, they lead either in two ways: one, to just demoralization, or to a kind of radicalization into finding other avenues to make sure that these really important policies are enacted in some way and fashion. And so I'm wondering what the perspective of ROC is, and of the restaurant workers that you work with. Is there a kind of idealistic notion that maybe we'd find a sponsor on this and have this be part of the national conversation via Congress? Or is it much more on the ground, this is a vehicle for us to continue to organize?
Yeah, so I hear you. I hear your cynicism, and I think it's very easy to lose hope. But we have had great conversations with a number of members of Congress who have been public champions of restaurant workers. And from the moment we introduced the process to create the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights to like the day when we launched and we introduced the actually text of the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, which was on Labor Day. We talked to Representatives Tlaib, Jayapal, Garcia, Newman, Polkan, and like others. And we are very close to having a resolution in support of the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights introduced in the House. And actually in this cycle before the end of the year. So we definitely expect this to happen soon, but this is just a beginning. Obviously, resolution has only so much weight. We will pursue the same in the Senate in the next cycle, and then at every state and local level where we can make some progress. And the resolutions need to be followed by specific policy bills and statutes and ordinances with strong enforcement provisions. So this is kind of a beginning, but it's an important beginning, because we're saying that the issues that restaurant workers face are very intertwined, and we cannot just focus on single one. And we are working with many organizations who support the Restaurant Workers Bill of Rights, and some of them include, I already mentioned, National Black Workers Center, but also Family Values at Work, Jobs to Move America, Paid Leave for All, Jobs with Justice, Heal Food Alliance, National Partnership for Women and Families, and many others. So this is a really movement, and as we discussed before, hopefully with other sectors, we are going to push for comprehensive policy reforms that benefits all workers.
Well, that is again, that's an arrow right to the heart of the cynic, right? You're doing more than I thought was possible. So good. Like I'm very happy for that. I think that that is what's needed. If nothing else, it will continue to spur conversation and activity, and that's important in and of itself. And so this is all positive. I think what ROC is doing is really important and special work, and an example to other organizations who maybe want to be worker led but just are not. That there is a lot that ROC can provide in terms of guidance and examples and best practices and a genuine way to do that. I remember specifically, I think it was a ROC. I don't know if it was led, but it was definitely involved with ROC when I was in DC. We got a tipped minimum wage to equal the regular minimum wage. And then, of course, the DC City Council overturned a referendum, which, you got to love when your government, your Republican government can overturn a Democratic decision. But still.
These were Democrats.
Yes, all Democrats. Yeah, exactly. So, but another important lesson about again, the ability, the how much support there is for this in the larger sort of voting public, and I think public generally, and and I think that's really just important in and of itself to know that these aren't really radical proposals. I think Americans and most people would be more than happy to have free access to healthcare and more a thriving wage, more time off. I mean, all these things are what most Americans would want. And so I think the work that you're doing on this is commendable. It is hopefully going to bear fruit. I guarantee it will bear fruit. And I look forward to seeing what happens with this, and happy to be at minimum talking with you about it. And hopefully, I do hope that co-op stuff percolates, because I think that would just, even better, another thing to advocate on and get all of us co-op nerds on board.
And I just want to add that, anyone who's listening and wants to learn more, or maybe they are representing an organization and wants to support it, please get in touch with me. My email is super easy, Eva, EVA, at ROC United, ROCunited.org. And also follow ROC United on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, wherever you are. We want to hear and support us, support organization. I think, and this is a shout out to all organizations that are worker-led organization. We need the resources. So if you want to support ROC United, ROCunited.org, there's a big donate button, and of course, get in touch, Eva at ROCunited.org.
Hey, you gave out your email, so beware. No, my last little pitch would be: look, if you go to restaurants, you have the means to be able to support restaurant workers, and you ought to. They are providing you the service that is beyond just the meal that you are eating, and you should do more than just eat the meal they're providing and help them out via ROC United's work. So, Eva, thanks so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it, and the best of luck with the work that you're doing.
Thank you, and tip generously until thriving wages.
There you go. Till a thriving wage. Be nice. Don't be an ass.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sensible Socialist Podcast. This podcast is supported by listeners like you, and no advertisements or anything will ever be said. If you want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/sensiblesocialist and give today. Also, please give us a review or a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, as it greatly helps. All right, see you next time.